Welcome to Why I Left, a podcast that explores the Great Resignation. I'm your host, Brian Aquart. Join me as I chronicle real stories from real people about the reasons they decided to leave their jobs during the pandemic and what has happened since. Hello, and thanks for tuning in to this episode of Why I Left. In today's episode, I chat with Jarvis Sam. Jarvis is a visionary leader who has left an indelible mark on some of the world's most prominent companies. He formerly served as the Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer at Nike, where he spearheaded initiatives to foster a culture of belonging within and beyond the organization. But he was looking to make more of an impact. So now, he's currently the founder and CEO of Rainbow Disruption, a groundbreaking multi-services DEI firm. Let's go check out his story. All right, welcome back. So our guest today is Jarvis Sam. Prior to starting Rainbow Disruption, he led a team at Nike dedicated to driving diverse representation, promoting inclusive leadership, and championing social justice education. He's worked with world-renowned athletes and prestigious sports leagues to execute key initiatives and was also named Forbes 30 Under 30 in Sports class of 2021, as well as a Portland Business Journal's 40 Under 40. Now, he also recently published his first book, DEI C.R.E.D.E.N.T.I.A.L, which I'm excited for him to talk about, and really excited for him to be on the show with us today. So hi, Jarvis, how you doing?
Hello, Brian. I am doing so wonderfully. Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Absolutely. Now, prior to us kind of getting into your career pivot during the pandemic, tell us a little bit about, your upbringing.
I'm originally from Houston, Texas, and I tell people that experience undoubtedly impacts my work and career with everything that I do. Growing up in Houston, core values are often instilled in us. And the way my mom, as a single parent, raised me and my siblings as first-generation college students was to value education immensely. Her point of view was that once we receive an education, it is something that no one can take away from you. It is something that can be leveraged for career growth and development, and something that becomes the essence of how you use and find your voice. And so certain values like justice, freedom, liberation, commitment were incredibly instilled in us. And ultimately, by the time I got to my undergraduate education at Rice, I wanted to understand, how do we expand some of those same values and their impact on us understanding things like history, sociology, and psychology. And so I went on to study in history, public policy, and sport management at Rice, particularly understanding the way in which topics like race and gender impact the sports and entertainment industry. From there, ultimately went to go work at Deloitte as a strategy consultant, aligned to some of their groups and partners in the oil and gas and telecommunication space, but really finally found my niche after a couple of years when I joined Google and began working in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space on the talent side. And so now for the last decade, I spent time at a couple of different tech companies, so Google and Snapchat, where I served as their first head of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then, of course, during my time at Nike. So for me, it was finding ways in which my background and the values that I was always taught early can now be utilized to have a stronger impact on nonprofits, corporate America, academic spaces, and then while it's a bit slower in the turn, impacting governmental spaces as well.
No, that's awesome. And as you mentioned, you held these prominent roles at Nike and Snap and Google, driving these DE&I type of initiatives. So could you share maybe like a pivotal moment in your career that really inspired your passion for creating these inclusive cultures within these types of organizations?
Yeah, undoubtedly. I think about some of the work that I did over at Google. I was based in the Austin office, but also did an expat assignment with the org in Brazil, aimed at driving some of the representation for women in technology, as well as Black communities in technology. And of course, definitions connected to race and ethnicity look so different at a global scale. That was such a light bulb moment for me, because I quickly began to realize some of these challenges around the haves and the have-nots and who has access and who has opportunity is certainly not just a US-based facet. It's impacted globally and the world over. And so how we think about creating strategies and approaches that support the global impact that we need to have was definitely a hallmark moment for me. It was incredible to get to live in Sao Paulo, engage in Brazilian culture, learn a bit of Portuguese, while also understanding the impact of things like colonialism on Brazil in as much as it has had an impact on the United States. And so being able to build new approaches that are aimed at trying to bridge the gap that exists within the digital divide definitely inspired in me the opportunity to see diversity, equity, and inclusion, not just as a workforce strategy, of which it is as well, but truly as a strategic, an ability to drive strategic transformation in organizations where, when deployed effectively, will impact future talents, experience, and create a bridge to access and opportunity.
Oh, definitely. And now in your line of work, you've collaborated with athletes and sports leagues, right? So you went from Google and Snap, some more like tech based. Now you move over to a place like a Nike, right?
Yeah.
So how do you approach building those types of meaningful relationships in the sports industry?
I think with any of this, it's finding out people's why. Empathetic leadership has to start with active listening. Understand what people's motivation and incentive is for wanting to get connected and involved in this work. And so with some of the various different projects that I worked on and helped to build at Nike and Snap, it was really connecting with the major stakeholders to get, why is this of interest to you? How do I leverage that motivation then to build something incredible to support the organization more broadly? Take, for example, some of the work that we did alongside Serena Williams. Her why, I think for many of us as both fans and consumers of her work, it's obvious. She and her sister, growing up as two Black girls in Compton, they understand the divisive nature of which inequity is and how it can feel. They have been on tennis courts with athletes from all around the world. So they've seen what experiences in sexism, racism, and various different phobias feels like as they're going about their way in their professional careers and professional experiences. And in addition to that, Serena has such a multifaceted background and career experience, not only being a mother, a wife, but an incredible investor with Serena Ventures, but also a designer in her own right, even having attended design school herself. And so in those spaces, she also saw the significant disparity that existed between racial representation in design spaces, where with many of the organizations to which she worked, including Nike, she didn't see the representation of folks that looked like her present in these spaces. And so it created a really clear opportunity where her why enabled us to think about how can we leverage the power of the brand and the infrastructure that we had built to develop something that helps to cater to and serve a broader audience. And that was the basis for how we started the Serena Williams Design Crew, a apprenticeship program that enabled students of color to come to Nike over the course of a 6 to 9 month period, develop some of the core skills in footwear, apparel, and equipment design, and ultimately led to a greater than 70% conversion rate for that talent into full-time career opportunities in the organization. And so it's really understanding what is that athlete's connection to the work, and then really delving into how can our infrastructure be leveraged and suited to help support bridging passion and purpose into real impact.
And I think that, that example with Serena is a great one, especially because, obviously the tennis piece we all know about, right? But I think what is maybe less spoken of is that design aspect, right? Yeah. The other aspects of her, like you said, this multifaceted individual that she is, that a lot of people speak about. Do you feel that more athletes are really starting to tap into that? Because that seems kind of golden.
I do. I think for so long in the sports and entertainment space, athletes and entertainers and media personalities, they would start these foundations, which were committed to supporting causes that they cared about. But at times there appeared to be this delineation between who they were, what they do, and then what they care about. And so it wasn't always clear, like, why does, childhood cancer impact you or your reality? Why does commitment and support for topics like pulmonary hypertension associations or Alzheimer's associations, why does that have such a personal connection to you? And I'm finding athletes are more committed now to telling their story and engaging in that narrative. That way, some of those points are more clear. Serena's just one example. I partnered closely with the sports marketing team at Nike to do a couple of different engagements connected to the Stronger Than One campaign done by the brand marketing team. In these campaigns, we partner with signature athletes, namely NFL athletes, to tell their stories about some of the community engagement and social impact work that they do beyond and outside of their core role as an athlete. And so we were able to partner with Josh Allen and do some work at a local hospital in Buffalo. We were able to partner with just so many different athletes to tell their story, unpack their experience, and ultimately find ways in which we as an institution can effectively use that same approach to storytelling to inspire our own social and community engagement. So with work that we do with LeBron James and how we support his I Promise School, for example, it really starts to incentivize how organizations and partners look at athletes in a truly 360 manner, where we're understanding and obsessing the athlete from a marketing standpoint, but also the causes that they care about and that they're passionate about.
No, I love that. Now, I want to take you back to COVID briefly, right? So March 2020, COVID hits us all. How did this time really start impacting your relationship with your job?
It's interesting. I think for many of us, somewhere between March 9th and March 13th, 2020, we got the email, or we were involved in conversations that said we were going to close our offices while we navigate this 4 to 6 week endeavor that is or was COVID. And I think we geared up for that. To me, the majority of impact actually happened closer to the late April and early May timeframe, because it was around then that people started to recognize this is going to be a bit more of a long haul. And so we are going to have to think about what felt like a temporary shift in how we were experiencing the workplace now was a cosmic shift in ways of working. We had to fully pivot. I remember the organization going from take your laptops home in March of 2020 to by May, setting up accounts on Staples and Office Depot saying, here's a per diem to buy a bunch of office supplies so that you can now have an office at home. That shift, it was highly indicative of what we were about to endure and where we were going. And so for me, the relationship with my job grew very strong up front because it had to. You're talking about an environment where your coworkers are now deeply in your living space. And some of the realities that many folks may have kept separate or held closer to the cuff or to the chest were kind of gone. Coworkers who people had not seen or experienced, their children, their family, their lifestyles, their living quarters is now fully open to the world. And so that dynamic of being unclear of if you're working from home or living at work undoubtedly had a big impact on a lot of folks, myself included, where I had to rethink and realign on what truly does the separation or this approach to work-life integration truly look like when, one, there's a ton of work to do, for sure. Two, with all aspects of kind of social being cut off and shut off because of the pandemic, this feels like the only thing to do at home. And so I found myself losing a bit of the balance or integration that I had previously had. And so over the course of 2021, it certainly took a while to get back to a more appropriate rhythm for how I navigated work-life integration.
Yeah. Is there anything that you would have done differently during that time?
I tend to live, Brian, with like a no regrets mentality. So,
That's cool.
So no, there's nothing that I would have done differently. I do think I'm very proud of some of the skills and hobbies and areas of focus that I picked up on. And I think for many of us, we obsessed human connection. Some of my greatest friends from about 10 or 15 years ago, several of which I worked with at Google, we don't talk very regularly. We maybe talk over text every 6 months or so, and then see each other in person maybe every 1 to 2 years at weddings or events. We started a Zoom call every other weekend. And so it was great to get to connect and, to redevelop these relationships with folks that we may have lost touch with previously. I think almost as soon as the world reopened, if you will, and social expanse returned to its traditional reality, a lot of those went away and we lost that. And so if there's any area that I would improve or harken back to, it would be that some of the focus that we built around establishing human connection with folks that we might have lost touch with.
No, that makes sense. And so, look, after being with Nike for about 5 years, you decided to ultimately resign in February of 2023. So, why did you leave your job?
Yeah, a few reasons. I absolutely love Nike. I love the brand. I love the organization. I love the incredible work and impact that we got to do and the connection that we got to make. Throughout my 5 years there, we deepened relationships with so many partners, so many athletes, with our consumer and with our employees, which was huge. We went from a space where there felt like this delineation between who works for Nike and who works at Nike, particularly when you think about the distinction between corporate employees versus those in retail, distribution, manufacturing, or those first line or frontline employees. And so to deepen that connection was inspiring. We set the stage and standard for how the world thinks about celebrations of Juneteenth, for example, how you leverage conversations about pride to be more than just internal ERG-led work and truly to build it into the consumer product with the Be True product and its connection with our athletes. And so when I made the decision to depart, it was really rooted in the fact that I go to institutions and organizations and I have a defined plan and approach for what it is that I want to leave as my mark on the organization and the impact that I want to make. And honestly, Brian, I felt that I had done just that already. When you take a look at the organization's annual impact report released in March of every year, it'll show you some of the impact that we made, including achieving nearly every one of the 13 targets set in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space 3 years ahead of schedule. For me, I knew and recognized the impact of what that meant on the organization, but I also felt that I was at a time where it was important for me to start finding ways to democratize the strategies and approaches that we built to continue to serve other organizations. I operate so well, Brian, in spaces where I'm context switching and context setting very often. And so in launching my own firm, I knew that I wanted to work across a number of different industries and sectors. I knew that I wanted to work with a variety of different groups and teams within organizations. And I knew that I wanted to tackle some of the biggest challenges connected to diversity, whether in brand and marketing, product, workforce, or otherwise. And so having the capability and potential to be able to do that was a really strong pull factor for me. Not a ton of push factors in the decision to leave Nike. Beyond the fact I don't consider myself much of a maintenance person. And when I feel that my job within an organization is done and that I have given my all to support it, that's a good time to explore something new. And I think one of the challenges, I look at organizations who have these long-standing chief DEI officers that have been in role, 7 years, 10 years, 12 years. And in some cases, it may work really well for the organization. But Brian, the nature of our work is changing so often that I think there is such power in having new leadership in that space driving social innovation on a relatively ongoing basis.
No, that makes sense. And look, it was kind of the catalyst of now you starting Rainbow Disruption, right? So tell us a little bit more about your company and, what you all do in helping drive change in other organizations. Now, because now your reach is very broad.
Yep. At the highest level, Brian, our focus is helping organizations realize the potential of leveraging diversity, equity, and inclusion to achieve some of its strategic outcomes, drive operational efficiency, and ultimately find new ways of innovation within their organizations. So many companies end up quoting the McKinsey study from 2015 and 2018 about the value and so-called business case for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And yet they don't have the tools, techniques, or capabilities to understand how to achieve some of those incredible goals and results that are outlined from McKinsey. The reality is for many of them, it's because there's not a fully integrated system or model for how they think about navigating beyond team and talent or people and culture strategies to actually starting to embed elements of equity and inclusion into innovation, into product, and into marketing. And so we built the firm centered around how do we bring some of those constructs to life in organizations. And so as we engage with teams, we do so on a variety of different fronts, from direct executive coaching, training and development, strategy development, current state assessment or auditing work for organizations, partnering with some of our external teammates to do marketing campaign, both development through the lens of the agency side, or understanding how marketing campaigns have landed with certain communities previously through things like market segmentation and development. And so I'm really thrilled that we have had the opportunity to work with a number of Fortune 500s, several technology companies, numerous companies in the nonprofit space, several in sports, entertainment, and media, and then a bit with governmental entities as well, to help them understand and redefine what their approach looks like in the space.
No, that's awesome. And now I also saw your post. You were in Times Square, right? So you came to New York, and you just released your first book, DEI Credential, right? So tell us more about that, why you wrote it, and what you hope people get out of it.
Yeah, October 2nd, 2023, DEI Credential officially hits the marketplace. We started pre-orders about a month ago, and I am just so thrilled about it. Some of those same values that I referenced earlier, Brian, that were instilled in me as a child connected to education, also have always incentivized me to want to become a published author and to want to write a book. Because for me, your ability to take your words and expressions and perspectives and put it down on paper in various different forms of literature, whether self-help books, corporate guides, educational resources, fiction, or otherwise, it is your sharing and creating skilled approaches of those self-expressions with the world. And that has always been my desire. And so DEI Credential has been such an incredible passion project and labor of love for me, because I took a look at so many guides that were available to people leaders, to teams, to folks in organizations seeking to understand how to leverage and impact the DE&I work. And so many of them were either written from such a siloed perspective, only navigating one area of the DEI continuum, or it was written by authors incredibly well-intended, but who were only writing from spaces of passion. It wasn't being written from the vantage point of someone who has sat in the chief DEI officer seat, who recognizes the amount of collaboration and engagement required by the executive team to support this work. And so DEI Credential explores 10 core global strategies that organizations can deploy to be able to have an incredible impact, not only on their approach to how they connect with their consumers, but how they drive congruence between consumer experience and employee experience. And so navigating topics like decolonization of the mind and product, where we talk about cultural appropriation versus appreciation in our product, navigating topics like the distinctions between equity and inequality, and what it means to build systems that are obsessing equity in team and talent processes, in pay equity, et cetera. The book really helps to give organizations some of the key grounding and infrastructure for how they should think about building effective DE&I programs and creating approaches to measuring the impact.
No, that's awesome. I'll make sure I do some promotion on the show whenever it comes out as well. So happy to do that. I saw the lead up for it, and so I'm excited to take a look at it myself.
Thank you.
So as you look these past few years, a lot of big changes have happened for you, right? And so, what have you learned most about yourself throughout this entire process?
I have learned about the importance of flexibility and a constant demonstration of empathy in this regard. For many of us in the DE&I space, we get into it based either on our academic backgrounds, a little bit of professional experience, but it's largely because of our own social identities to which we hold. And I'm no different. As a very proud Black gay man, I have always wanted to create space and opportunity for others like me and those that also exist in similarly situated, marginalized experiences to be able to navigate the world in a way that feels inclusive and equitable to our own experiences. That has been such a significant tenet of how I think about driving my work. And in that way, sometimes it is very difficult to still demonstrate empathy when you know that you're engaging in conversations with people who don't believe that you should have the same rights, access, and opportunity as them, who, use their macro aggressive approaches at the ballot box to deny you access to basic and fundamental human rights, and who continually use their voice in a way that's trying to create barriers or walls that forces you to remain in the space where identity covering is everything that you do. And yet, as a DEI leader and practitioner, I have to balance moments in which I am an advocate for the work and moments where I'm an activist for the work. And I have to demonstrate empathy even to folks whose perspectives or ideologies I disagree with or that are fundamentally misaligned with my own. Because in workplaces, diversity and understanding of social identities is not just one thing. Those identities that exist below that so-called metaphoric waterline, things like political views to which people hold, have to have a space in the workplace as well. Political diversity alongside things like age diversity have to be conversation pieces in the workplace. And so over the years, Brian, I have found such a powerful way to empathetically engage with those communities, find a space of common ground, and leverage some of those age-old principles that have been used in government and politics around truth and reconciliation to find ways to help them understand our goal is not to agree on everything. In fact, that doesn't lead for innovation or productivity in workplaces. It's fine if we disagree, but respect, candor, and a continued creation of psychologically safe spaces for all of us is what will drive the work forward. And so that's been a really important lesson for me over the years, but one that I'm very grateful to have learned.
No, that's great. One part of the show people love, and I actually love too, but it's really the advice section. So when you think about maybe students or young professionals who are really passionate about making an impact in this type of field, what advice would you give them in order to really get that start?
Two things. I think one is recognize that no one's career in this space or otherwise is linear. If you had told me that my career would be as a DEI practitioner when I was graduating from undergrad at Rice, I would have asked you what that even meant and what DEI was. My understanding of some of the topics and concepts that now influence the way that I do my work was really strong, but I didn't know that there was a full career opportunity in this space. There were so many other names or titles that were given to it that didn't fully register for me. And so, no, my career has in no way been linear. I never knew or thought in 2018 when I joined Nike that I would ever become the organization's chief diversity, equity, and inclusion officer. And so my advice is avoid this tendency to compare yourself to others and avoid this tendency to try to take on a linear approach or perspective to your career, because there will always be opportunities that come up that we absolutely must try to explore that are just super powerful and meaningful in the end and how we navigate it. The second piece is there's a lot of folks that have a passion for the diversity, equity, and inclusion space. And I talk to a lot of particularly undergrads about this, Brian. In my perspective, and it's probably one that many of my peers in the DE&I space might disagree with me on, but I still uphold it. I believe that if someone is coming out of undergraduate education, don't go into the DE&I space up front. I think that I have benefited so much in my role, growth, and trajectory in this space because I worked in the business first. As a strategy consultant, I knew the way business operations work for an organization. And so I'm not leading with just passion. I'm truly recognizing that this operations team in the organization actually cares about these three things. This finance team actually cares about these two things. And so now as I'm going in to do the work, because DE&I in most organizations, it is an exercise in influence. Oftentimes we have no real authority to build certain things. Fortunately, I was given a ton of autonomy to do that at Nike, but we don't really have a ton of autonomy in most organizations to build or own most things. We don't hold P&L responsibilities. And so how we think about influencing organizations that do and that have that ability is so top of mind. And so I think it's important that folks learn how businesses run and what's important there, and then jump into the DE&I space where they can have a real approach to what influence looks like.
No, that's solid advice. And what's one question you have for me that I could potentially answer?
Yeah, I think, Brian, as you think about your own career and experience and, your decision to do this podcast, I would say what has been the most common theme that you see people hold related to this topic of why I left?
It's a great question. So what the biggest theme really, so obviously the show is about why people are leaving their jobs. But as I've come to continue to record, it's really a show about self-actualization. It's
Absolutely.
about people overcoming fear and recognizing that, hey, it's very rare for us to go through one thing all simultaneously.
Absolutely.
And for people to sit in that space with themselves, so much reflection happened. And some people were like, I've been sitting on the sidelines for XYZ for so long. I'm in the game. And whatever that game is for you, solopreneurship or a different industry or whatever, or career break, who knows? That's what it's about. So the biggest theme is overcoming fear and self-actualization. And it's been inspiring to have, conversations with folks like yourself and everyone else, because, it's helped me think about truthfully my own journey, right? Like you mentioned something earlier about sometimes there's paths in life that you truthfully just can't pass up, right? Yeah. And I've been there, right? And my career I always say I took the scenic path to get here. So those have been the main themes of the show: overcoming fear and really people realizing who they truly are. And I love that. And the feedback I get about it is, people see themselves in guests like you and other folks, and it means I'm doing something right. So.
Absolutely.
Well, look, I want to thank you for taking some time to join us today. It's been a pleasure, getting to know you. It was great connecting in New York when you were here, and would love for our listeners to find where they can, or would love for you to share where our listeners can find you and support you, and obviously, buy your book when it's out.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Brian. The two main platforms that I post both thought leadership and then personal perspectives on some of the current events and social topics related to DE&I are on my Instagram, which you can find at official Jarvis Sam, and then on my LinkedIn, which is just Jarvis Sam, and you can find details about myself and the Rainbow Disruption there. And then to purchase DEI Credential, it's featured on a couple of different platforms. You can find it in the Google Play bookstore. You can find it in both ebook and paperback on Amazon.com through Kindle on the ebook side, and then through the Amazon.com marketplace for the paperback side. And then it's also available at Barnes & Noble in both ebook as well as paperback purchases. And then given the publishing approach that I took, you can go into many different bookstores all around the nation, simply request it, and they'll order and deliver it to you.
Awesome. Good to hear. Well, thank you for that info. And look, that'll do it for today's episode. Again, I want to thank my guest, Jarvis Sam, for joining us today. I'll make sure I share all of that information in our show notes. And look, I hope you all have a great week, and we'll definitely see you next time. Jarvis, thanks again.
Thanks so much, Brian. Take care, everybody.
Thanks again for listening to Why I Left. Be sure to join us next time for more stories from the Great Resignation. Visit us at www.whyileft.co. That's whyileft.co. And subscribe to the show on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.